Britain in the 1960s was a nation on fire with confidence, and nowhere was that energy more electric than in its motor industry. Designers were dreaming boldly, engineers were pushing boundaries, and the cars rolling out of British factories were turning heads from London to Los Angeles. The world was watching Britain, and Britain was delivering. Today on UK Car Vault, we are counting down 10 of the most iconic British cars from that extraordinary decade. And by the time we reach number 1, you will realize that one single British car did something no car in history had ever done before, and nobody saw it coming. Let's begin. At number 10, we open the countdown with a car that understood exactly what driving was supposed to feel like. The Triumph TR4. Launched in 1961 by the Standard Triumph Motor Company in Coventry. The TR4 was a proper open-top sports car. Long bonnet, compact body, a face that looked like it meant business from every angle. It carried a 2138cc four-cylinder engine that produced a lively and characterful performance. Not the fastest car of the decade, but fast enough to make every journey feel like an occasion. What made the TR4 special was its honesty. It never pretended to be something it wasn't. It was a driver's car. Simple, direct, rewarding. The rack and pinion steering gave it a sharpness that drivers genuinely loved. The optional Surrey top, a removable hard roof panel, made it practical enough for British weather without losing its open-air character. Triumph sold it in enormous numbers, particularly in America, where buyers fell for its combination of British character and accessible price. The TR4 opened this decade of British motoring with exactly the right attitude. Confident, capable, and completely unapologetic about what it was. At number 9. Some cars are built for speed. Others are built for authority. The Rover P5B belonged firmly in the second category. Launched in 1967, the P5B was the result of Rover dropping a 3.5-liter V8 engine, borrowed from Buick, into their already distinguished P5 body. The result was a car that combined genuine performance with an interior that felt closer to a private members club than a motor vehicle. Deep leather seats, walnut veneer across every surface, a quietness at speed that made the outside world feel like someone else's problem. Prime ministers rode in the P5B. Senior cabinet ministers were driven to Downing Street in it. Harold Wilson used one. Edward Heath used one. The Queen used one. When a car is trusted by the highest offices in the land, it has done something right. The P5B was not flashy. It never raised its voice. It simply arrived. And when it arrived, everyone in the room noticed. A car of quiet, unshakable authority, and one of the finest things Britain produced in the entire decade. At number 8, if the Rover P5B was about authority, the Lotus Elan was about something altogether different. Pure joy. Launched in 1962 by Lotus Cars in Norfolk, the Elan was a small, lightweight roadster that changed the way people thought about sports cars. Colin Chapman, Lotus founder and engineering genius, built the Elan around a backbone chassis with a fiberglass body. The result was a car that weighed almost nothing, and in the world of sports cars, lightweight is everything. The twin-cam engine, developed in partnership with Ford, gave the Elan a performance that felt electric. Not because the power figures were extraordinary, but because every input from the driver was answered immediately, honestly, and with total precision. Steering that felt alive, handling that made experienced drivers catch their breath, a driving experience that made other cars feel numb by comparison. It was small, it was sometimes unreliable. Owning one required patience and a reasonable relationship with a good mechanic. But nobody who drove a Lotus Elan ever forgot it. That is not something every car can claim. At number 7, by the early 1960s, the Jaguar Mark II had already become something of a legend. Launched in 1959 and selling strongly through the entire first half of the decade, the Mark II was a compact sports saloon that offered performance, elegance and value in a combination nobody else could match. The top specification 3.8-liter version was genuinely fast. Fast enough that the police bought them to catch criminals, and criminals bought them because they were fast enough to outrun the police. Both sides of the law agreed on at least one thing: the Mark II was exceptional. The interior was everything a Jaguar should be. Leather, wood, instruments arranged with the kind of care that suggested someone had actually thought about the person sitting behind the wheel. And the exterior, those curved lines, the wide glass house, the elegant proportions, was one of William Lyon's finest achievements. Lyons had an eye for beauty that very few designers in automotive history have matched. The Mark II was proof that British cars at their best could compete with anything in the world, at any price, from any country.
At number 6, in 1964, a car appeared on cinema screens around the world that changed everything. James Bond drove an Aston Martin DB5 in Goldfinger, and from that moment, the DB5 was not just a car, it was a symbol. But here's the thing. The DB5 did not need James Bond to be extraordinary. It already was. Launched in 1963 by Aston Martin in Newport Pagnell, the DB5 carried a 3995cc straight-six engine, producing 282 brake horsepower. It was hand-built by craftsmen who treated every car as a personal responsibility. The body, designed by Italian coach builder Carrozzeria Touring, was one of the most beautiful shapes ever put on four wheels. Long, low, perfectly proportioned, a shape that looked fast even standing still. Inside, it was a sanctuary of leather and aluminium and carefully considered detail. A car built for people who understood that true luxury is never accidental. Bond made it famous, but the DB5 made Bond believable. Without that car, the whole fantasy falls apart, and that tells you everything you need to know about how special it really was. At number 5, some cars do not just sell well, they become part of everyday life. The Ford Cortina Mk1. Launched in 1962 by Ford of Britain at their Dagenham factory, Ford looked at what British families actually needed: space, reliability, economy, and a price that did not require a second mortgage, and delivered all four in one simple, honest package. The Cortina was light, it was practical, and it came in enough variants to suit almost every buyer. Basic models for the budget-conscious, the GT version for those who wanted a little more excitement, and the legendary Lotus Cortina, developed with Colin Chapman, for those who wanted a great deal more excitement indeed. It won the British Saloon Car Championship. It dominated the East African Safari Rally. It sold in numbers that made Ford's rivals deeply uncomfortable. But what made the Cortina truly iconic was not the motorsport success. It was the fact that it was everywhere. On every street, on every driveway, in every family's memory. A car that belonged to the people, and the people loved it back.
At number 4, in 1965, Bentley launched something that represented a genuine turning point in how luxury cars were built: the T-Series. The first Bentley to use a monocoque body construction, abandoning the traditional separate chassis that had defined the company since its earliest days. This was not a small decision. This was Bentley acknowledging that the world had changed and choosing to change with it. The T-Series shared its platform with the Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow. Both cars developed together at enormous expense. The 6.75-liter V8 engine delivered power in that uniquely Bentley way. Not with drama, not with noise, simply with an effortless, seemingly endless supply of forward motion. The interior set standards that other manufacturers spent years trying to reach. Hand-stitched leather, deep carpets, a craftsmanship that was visible in every surface and every detail. It was quieter than almost anything else on the road, more refined, more composed. The T-Series proved that a British luxury car could be both traditional and genuinely modern at the same time. That is a harder balance to achieve than it sounds.
At number 3,
When the Jaguar E-Type was unveiled at the Geneva Motor Show in 1961, Enzo Ferrari called it the most beautiful car ever made. That is not a compliment given lightly by a man who spent his life building beautiful cars. The E-Type was designed by Malcolm Sayer, an aerodynamicist who approached car design with mathematical precision. Every curve had a purpose. Every line was the result of genuine engineering thought. The long bonnet, the fastback roofline, the oval front grille, it looked like nothing else on Earth. Underneath, a 3.8-liter straight-six engine capable of genuine 150 miles per hour performance, at a price that put genuine supercar performance within reach of buyers who had never imagined they could afford it. The motoring press ran out of superlatives almost immediately. It won races, it won concours events, it won the hearts of an entire generation. The E-Type is not just one of the greatest British cars of the 1960s. It is one of the greatest cars ever built, by anyone, anywhere. Enzo Ferrari was right.
At number 2, in 1965, Rolls-Royce did something they had never done before. They built a car that was genuinely new. The Silver Shadow replaced the Silver Cloud, a car built on traditional separate chassis construction, with a fully modern monocoque body, independent suspension all round, disc brakes, a car that looked to the future rather than the past. And yet it remained unmistakably, perfectly, completely Rolls-Royce. The 6.75-liter V8 engine moved the Silver Shadow through the world with a serenity that no other manufacturer could achieve. Wind noise was essentially absent. Road noise was absorbed before it reached the cabin. The experience of traveling in a Silver Shadow was unlike anything else available at any price. The interior was not merely luxurious. It was the definition of luxury, the standard against which everything else was measured. Rolls-Royce sold the Silver Shadow for 15 years. It became the most successful Rolls-Royce in the company's history up to that point. In a decade full of remarkable British cars, the Silver Shadow stood apart, as it always had, as it always intended to.
And here we are at number 1. The car that won rallies, the car that crossed every class barrier, the car that defined an entire decade. The Mini Cooper S. Developed in partnership with racing car constructor John Cooper, the Cooper S took the brilliant but humble Mini and transformed it into something that humiliated far more expensive and powerful machinery on the rally stages of Europe. It won the Monte Carlo Rally 3 times, in 1964, 1965, and 1967. On roads that were frozen, treacherous, and brutally demanding, a tiny British car driven by skilled hands beat everything the rest of the world could throw at it. The engine, a 1275cc unit producing around 76 brake horsepower in standard form, sounds modest on paper, but the Cooper S was light, agile, and fitted with a front-wheel drive layout that gave it traction advantages its rivals simply could not match. But the Cooper S was not just a racing car. Ordinary buyers fell in love with it too. Factory workers drove it, film stars drove it, fashion designers drove it, rock musicians drove it. It brought genuine performance to people who could never afford a sports car, and it did it with a character, a charm, and an infectious personality that no rival at any price could replicate. It did not just win races, it won hearts, it won culture, it won a decade. No British car of the 1960s meant more to more people than the Mini Cooper S, and nobody, absolutely nobody, saw it coming.
10 cars, 10 moments of brilliance, 10 reasons why the 1960s remained the golden age of British motoring. These were not just machines. They were expressions of a nation at the peak of its creative confidence, a country that looked at the world and decided it could do things better, differently, more beautifully than anyone else. And for one extraordinary decade, it was absolutely right.
Leave a comment below. We read every single comment. And if you love British motoring history, subscribe to UK Car Vault. We'll keep telling the stories worth remembering.